Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lollipop and today I'm going to be doing a full comparison between the Trek Dual Sport and FX bikes. Since both of these bikes are hybrid bikes, I feel like it may be a bit confusing to figure out which one is better for your specific riding style. They do have some comparable prices and a lot of similar parts as well, and like the Dual Sport and Marlin series comparison I did in my last video, the Dual Sport and FX bikes seem to look similar at a first glance. Now, I mentioned this in my previous video, which I'll link in the description below, but I actually did see the 2021 Dual Sport 3 at my local bike shop recently, and I'll show a short video of that right now. But anyways, in my videos I usually try to go more in depth about various components on each bike, such as the drivetrains and suspension forks, but since both of these lineups have 4 bikes or more, that would get too complicated and end up being too long of a video. As a result, I'm going to make this a simpler video that can quickly and easily help you understand what the main differences are between these bikes and what they are intended for. But with that said, I will include a table at the end of this video going over all the main differences between the Dual Sport 1 and FX1 disc as an example of what changes between the two lineups. Now before I begin, I want to make a few notes about the bikes I'm covering so we're on the same page. I'm only going to focus on the men's versions of all these bikes and only ones offered in the United States. I will note that there are women's versions of almost all of these bikes, but not all of them. The only differences they have in each lineup are a more comfortable women's seat and some different colors. There are also international versions of some of these bikes, but usually the only differences they have are the color options available. Additionally, the FX lineup has several different versions of each of their bikes, but usually the differences are self-explanatory. For example, the normal FX1 also has an FX1 stagger version, which just has a different staggered frame design that makes it easier to get on and off the bike. There is also an FX1 disc bike, which uses disc brakes instead of rim brakes for better stopping power. Then there is the FX1 Stagger disc, which is unsurprisingly just the FX1 Stagger with disc brakes. These variations of the same bike are available in some of the other FX models, but not all 6 of them. With that out of the way, I'm going to give a bit of an overview on both the Dual Sport and FX lineups to help you better understand what they are supposed to be used for. Both lineups are actually hybrid bike lines from Trek, which means that they have wider tires than road bikes and narrower tires than mountain bikes, so they're somewhere in between. They're made to work just as well on the pavement as on gravel, and can thus be used as your only bike for commuting or fitness purposes. They also both have DuoTrap S compatibility, which allows you to place a separate device on your bike that connects to your phone and tracks your fitness progress on the bike. But the differences between these two bikes is that the Dual Sport has a front suspension fork and wider tires, and frame geometry that is closer to a mountain bike, while the FX does not have any suspension, has thinner tires, and frame geometry closer to a road bike. Therefore, I would say the Dual Sport is better suited for the rider who wants to ride 50% on the road and 50% on the trail, while the FX is better for riders who prefer the road more, so it's more of a 75% road and 25% trail split. That being said, both of these bikes are not intended to go on anything more difficult than beginner or light trails, since their tires and suspension forks and other components are not as suitable for those big bumps on rougher terrain. You can think of these bikes in 2 different ways in my opinion, with a glass half full or a glass half empty mentality. On one hand, they combine the best parts of a road bike and a mountain bike to be a perfect in-between, and on the other hand, they aren't as good as either mountain bikes or road bikes in their respective categories. Generally, I think they can make great commuter or fitness bikes since you have wider tires than conventional road bikes on both, and they do have the ability to go on some light trails if you need to. So that's the general gist of what each of these bikes should be used for. Now I'm going to do an actual comparison between the Dual Sport 1 and the FX1 disc, since these bikes are at the exact same price point of $550 and it may be hard to notice their differences right away. But if you are not interested in that, the main thing to remember about these bikes is that the Dual Sport is for someone who wants to ride slightly harder trails or ride trails more often, while the FX is for someone who wants something more rugged than a road bike, but still prefers the road for their rides, or perhaps does not want to sacrifice as much speed on the road, since the FX bikes are lighter and have thinner tires. Now, one very important thing to note about these bikes is that they use mainly the exact same components between the bikes, besides the suspension forks and the tires. I'll show this in my comparison right now, but the FX and Dual Sport bikes that have the same numbers, like the Dual Sport 2 and the FX2 disc, generally have the exact same drivetrains, wheel sets, and other shared parts, so that is something to keep in mind when buying these. But onto the comparison. I'll also quickly mention that I'm comparing the 2020 FX with the 2021 Dual Sport, since only the Dual Sport had an updated model for 2021, but the only difference from 2020 for the Dual Sport that affects the ride quality of the bike are the tires, which have been slightly changed from 38C tires to 40C, so they are a bit wider. But first, let's talk about the frames. Both frames have internal cable routing and use Trek's Alpha Gold aluminum for construction, which just means they are lightweight, strong, and have smooth designs. Both frames have the DuoTrap S compatibility mentioned before, and the only difference between them is their geometry. I'll throw up the specifications on the frames so you can see all of them here, but basically the Dual Sport is sportier and more oriented for trail riding, while the FX is closer to a road bike frame for higher speed. The suspension forks are definitely different between these bikes, with the Dual Sport using an actual suspension fork, which is the SR Suntour NEX coil fork with 63mm of travel, while the FX does not have any suspension and thus uses the FX steel fork. Having a suspension fork is a pretty big plus if you are riding on a trail, since it helps absorb bumps better to give you a smoother and more comfortable ride, and also to prevent potential damage to the bike if you hit much bigger bumps. However, it should be noted that the suspension fork on the Dual Sport is not rated for really bumpy terrain, and if you do want something that can handle trails better, an actual mountain bike line like the Marlin series would be better suited. But the Dual Sport will definitely handle those bumps better than the FX bike. The wheels on these bikes are actually exactly the same, but they just use different tires. The FX bike uses 700 by 35C Bontrager tires, which are 30 TPI, while the Dual Sport uses Bontrager 700 by 40C tires that are 60 TPI. Going from 35C to 40C is a noticeable difference in tire width of about 0.3 inches, which does allow the Dual Sport to have better traction on trails and provides a softer ride when you're dealing with more bumps on the road or trail. Consequently, the FX tires will be faster on the road or on flatter areas since they are thinner. The TPI just tells you how many threads were used to construct the tire, with a higher TPI meaning more threads and a lighter weight tire for better flexibility, while lower TPI means the tire is more durable. Besides those differences, these bikes actually have the exact same drivetrain and almost all the other parts, with the exception of a slight difference in the brakes between the two, though both brakes are Tektro disc brakes and should perform similarly. Now the weight of these bikes is slightly different as well, but the FX bikes will generally be lighter since they do not have suspension forks and use thinner tires. Overall, I'd say the main difference between these bikes is the frame, suspension fork, and the tires. But to sum it all up, get the Dual Sport if you want a good commuter or fitness bike that is more durable and comfortable, and if you want to ride trails more often or ride more difficult trails. But get the FX if you want the same fitness or commuter bike, but you would prefer to stay on the road more and want a faster and lighter bike. And that concludes this video. I hope all of you enjoyed, and I hope this helped you out in understanding which bike serves which purpose, and if it did help, please like the video and subscribe so I know, and leave a comment if you have anything else to add. But besides that, thank you guys so much for watching, and keep biking.